All right, welcome. So this video is alignment over force, how to achieve your goals effortlessly. So this video is going to talk about why alignment is more important than force when it comes to work and achieving your goals. And what I mean by force is essentially forced effort. So when we strain or we think that effort alone is what will allow us to achieve our goals. This is why some people tend to struggle when it comes to achieving goals and achieving abundance easily and effortlessly, because of the fact that when you are not aligned, but you put in mass amounts of effort, you are only doing so much. You're only working within the physical, and you can't necessarily change something physically within the physical world, if that makes sense. The only way that you can change things in your physical reality is by altering yourself internally and then allowing that to be expressed externally. So this video is going to teach you guys all about why force doesn't work and why alignment is going to be more effective than force when it comes to achieving goals, when it comes to progression. So the first section here is why progress feels like running into a wall. What do I mean by this? So for a lot of people, if you have been working or putting in effort, right, doing the actions, let's say this idea of monk mode where you put 90 days into a specific goal and you only grind on that goal, sacrificing everything from health to relationships, etc., just to achieve this one goal. And I don't believe that periods of time where you are grinding and focused are bad. However, if you think that by forcing effort throughout a certain period of time, you will be able to achieve a certain goal and become a certain person, you are wrong, because you are missing a step. And if you are in this stage of life where you are just focused on the effort, the work, and pushing, almost forcing to the goal, you're basically straining through this process. And the reason that strain is bad is because it'll eventually lead to burnout. For me, at least, these goals that I have are things that I want to be doing for the rest of my life, right? The thing that I'm pursuing right now is something I'd like to be doing for the rest of my life. So with that perspective, it's not going to get me to where I want to be if I just grind once and I push through it, force through it in a way that's not sustainable, because this is something I want to do for the rest of my life. Without the identity change, the mental change, the psychological change, the energetic change, you can't sustain this level of effort because you haven't yet become the person. But by focusing on this effort and this strain, it feels like every time you make some progress, you run into a wall. And it's not like you're running into a wall or a new step to progress and get to the next place. It feels as though you're running into a literal brick wall where you cannot move forward no matter how hard you do it. And what a lot of people are doing is, instead of trying to figure out a new way around the wall, they're running into the wall full force, and when they get bumped off the wall, they back up a little bit further and they run a little bit faster into the wall. Versus the idea of alignment is almost like going and getting yourself a sledgehammer or a drill, something that will allow you to break down the wall. And it's a botched analogy, but the idea is that when you're focused on the external, when you're focused on the physical work that's required to get done and not focused on the internal first, you're basically running into that brick wall. Whereas focusing on the internal is like equipping yourself with the tools to break through that wall. So I'm going to quickly explain what I mean by forcing results. All right. So I'm going to give you a general understanding of what forcing results looks like and why it's not going to work. So the actual work itself, right? Putting in the effort, putting in the energy to do the physical work. An example would be not so much putting in the energy. When you are able to apply your energy to it, this is different. But if you think about just when you're in a position where you aren't mentally there, you don't want to be doing it, but you're just forcing to get the work done. If you think that doing this over a long period of time will eventually get you to a certain result, you are wrong, because you are unable to sustain this state, considering it doesn't actually feel or seem to be aligned with your internal state. Although work is difficult for me, as it is for everybody else, I feel fully and utterly aligned with what I'm doing and the work that I'm creating. And so although it still requires discipline, it feels a lot more effortless because it's aligned with who I am. So forcing results is like doing the work but not feeling aligned with it. And again, this is different from discipline. This is not discipline. Discipline is you are internally aligned with the result, the work, and the person you're becoming. However, you feel a little bit resistance to doing it. And discipline is the act of doing it anyways. That is slightly different. When you are completely unaligned with it, right? Let's say you are the type of person who is meant to be pursuing a YouTube business, right? We'll say a YouTube business, right? You internally are aligned with the YouTube business, but you try to pursue dropshipping and e-commerce because of the fact that it seems to be an option to make more money. That would be a misaligned point of effort, right? If you're putting in all the effort, all the work, and all the energy to create this result, but you aren't aligned with the thing you're creating, that is what I will be referring to as forcing results, all right? So another thing is like this grind set, and grinding isn't bad, right? The idea of being on your grind isn't bad, but this grind set, thinking that if we just forget about all of our needs and completely and utterly focus on work and only work, that we'll somehow get to where we want to be. The point with this is it's unsustainable. And so when you get to the end of this bout, you have this big transformation, you get this big result. Most people will typically revert back to where they were originally because of the fact that the effort required to create the result they've now created is not sustainable by the person that they are. And another thing to encapsulate this idea of forcing results is strain. If you feel like you are straining to get work done instead of working to get work done, and what I mean by working is you can be putting in effort. It can be difficult, right? It can feel uncomfortable to work for long periods of time. But if you are straining to force yourself through the work, that is an example of forcing these results. And then the last thing is sacrificing the wrong thing. Sacrifice is necessary for creating results, for getting success. But if you are sacrificing the wrong things to get some type of ego-based success, right? So ego-based success means that it's something that the ego wants, right? All things that require a sacrifice of health, relationships, and not bad relationships, but good relationships, right? So health, relationships, and your own mental health and well-being. If you are sacrificing these things for some type of success, it is typically ego-based. And we don't want ego-based success, we want purpose-based success. And purpose is something that we are here on earth to complete our purpose. Therefore, we are working at completing our purpose throughout the entirety of our lifetime. Again, what this means is basically we want to be pursuing the goal that is sustainable based on who we are. So yes, there's self-transformation, self-improvement, self-development. But again, this is different from doing something that's completely unaligned with who you are, right? So sacrificing the wrong things, meaning sacrificing health and allowing yourself to fall off your health to become successful. Because again, what happens is you get one result, but you cost yourself another area of life, and therefore you'll have a new problem to face once that period of work is done. So that's what I mean by forcing results, right? When you're forcing results, you're forcing effort, you're doing something that's misaligned, but trying to almost grind or push your way through it to get to the result on the other side because your ego wants something associated with that result. Alignment with your goals, however, looks like flow, right? When you have this flow state, and I kind of shat on the idea of a 90-day monk mode period, but when this 90-day monk mode period feels like a flow, right? It feels like a 90-day flow where you are fully bringing together all of the pieces required to create your result, right? That is something completely different because that's something where you are aligned with what you're creating and you're aligned with the actions required to create it, and therefore just completely removing anything that's misaligned with that specific goal, with those specific actions. That's what a 90-day monk mode should look like versus just 16-hour work days where you're just straining and forcing the outcome, the result. The next thing is opportunities open themselves up to you. You don't feel like you have to create the opportunity. They open themselves up to you. They become available to you because you have become aligned with that actual outcome, with that goal, right? So that's another thing. You don't have to strain and force to get to an opportunity to where you can take things to the next level. Alignment with the goal and alignment with the person who you need to become to achieve that goal will lead you to getting those opportunities, will lead you to being open and receiving those types of opportunities to be able to go and evolve, take it to the next level. Then we have effortless progress. So another encapsulation of this idea of alignment to your goals is effortless progress. It feels like progress just happens effortlessly because of the fact that we are consistently able to not just work at it, but feel in alignment with the work that we're doing. And so therefore we make progress faster because we're more engaged in the process of learning, we're more engaged in the output, and so therefore we're able to observe faster progress, more progression, versus if we're just working at something and we're not really giving it the same attention, the same energy as we would if we were fully aligned with it. And the last thing is true motivation. True motivation is not this burst of desire to achieve something. Right? True motivation is this feeling of fire within us, burning and desiring to constantly be expressed, to constantly refine our craft, to constantly grow and evolve and become better. That's true motivation. And that's fueled by alignment with a specific goal and consistent effort towards that goal. So that's what alignment with your goals would look like, right? Is being fully internally aligned, fully mentally and energetically aligned with what you want to do, and aligning your actions to what you want to be doing. So that way you can continuously make progress in a specific direction. So why is alignment so much more effective than force, right? Because force, it sounds as though force would work, right? A lot of people talk about basically sacrifice everything, only work 12 hours a day. Why wouldn't this be more effective than internal alignment? And this is because what I'm saying is not one or the other, right? I'm not saying you either work a lot or you're aligned with your goals. Because in reality, if you are truly aligned with your goals, you'll probably be working 12-hour days because that's where you feel as though you naturally want to be. So the difference is alignment with your goals allows you to do that in a way that feels effortless, that feels like a flow state, that feels like progression and learning and effort are almost a form of bliss, right? That's what alignment looks like. And therefore we can work and we can put in that effort a lot easier and therefore sustain it a lot longer. Versus forcing the outcome is we may need to be doing something else. We may think we want to be doing something else. We may be aligned with a different person, but we're forcing the output. We're forcing the work. We're forcing the physical actions as a way of offsetting everything else that we're doing internally against our specific goals, right? And so that's what force looks like. And with that example, that comparison, it's very obvious why alignment would be more effective. If you are aligned with where you want to go, the natural outcome of your life, your patterns, your actions is to work through the specific things in order to get you from point A to point B, which is where you are aligned with going. So if you are aligned with where you want to go, that means you're no longer aligned with where you're at, meaning your natural process will be to slowly integrate your life into this new alignment, this new reality that you've become aligned with. And so the work, the effort, the difficult part becomes a natural byproduct of your current state of alignment, your current state of being, your current internal state. And a lot of people confuse this with this like manifestation idea of you just think about the goal and it happens. That's not how it works, right? You don't think about the goal. You become aligned with the goal. And what alignment means is your energetic state, your mental state, your thoughts and patterns, your feelings, your emotions, your expressions, your physical actions, the things that you do day to day, the things that you speak about every single day, and the type of person you become and carry yourself as. That is what alignment means, right? So that is what alignment is. When you become fully aligned internally, your being becomes aligned with something new, right? Something greater than where you're currently at. This is different from this idea of manifestation because you're not only thinking in accordance, but you're making it so that your thought patterns are that of the individual who lives the reality you want to live, right? Your thought patterns, your emotional state and condition, therefore the actions that you take, everything becomes fully aligned with that goal, that outcome. And so therefore naturally what happens is your reality starts to reflect that. Versus if you think about the goal that you want to achieve, think about the actions you want to take, but then refuse to take action, that's not true alignment. That would not be alignment, right? That's the equivalent of the reverse, where you're doing the actions but none of the internal work. If you're doing the internal work but none of the actions, you still won't see the result. However, the internal state comes first. If you align yourself internally first, the actions naturally become the byproduct of that. A lot of things happen in reverse in reality. Like you just do this work, magically become this person, and then achieve the goal. You have to internally become the person to be able to do the work in the correct way to be able to create the result, right? So that is why alignment is so effective, is because alignment allows you to see the outcome you want to achieve and then integrate yourself into that reality by changing everything that you do physically. But if you're already aligned, everything misaligned in your day-to-day lifestyle, your habits, your thought patterns, you can now start to address and correct by aligning that to that goal that you're trying to achieve. And so by doing this constantly, and then also consistently staying focused on the work and making sure we are doing the work and are getting everything done, we will achieve our goals a lot faster and a lot easier than if we are trying to force the outcome by condensing everything into this one block and just forcing our way through it to get to the end and get it over with, right? We need to be willing to align ourselves fully to this outcome if we want to achieve it. And that's not to say you can't achieve it with force, but you will not be able to sustain it through force. Now, we're going to talk about how to internally align with your goals, right? So how do we actually internally align to our goals? So the first step here is our thoughts, right? Our thoughts are the first thing that we want to worry about. And not just our thoughts, but our mind in general, the state and condition of our mind, the way we view reality. So we need to condition our mind to view us as the individual that we want to become, right? So if we want to make $1 million business, right, we have to become internally, mentally, we have to become the person who can run $1 million business. So that looks like reading the right books, listening to the right podcasts. When you think thoughts that aren't in alignment with that goal, you have to alter that thought pattern, right? You have to change that thought. You have to change that belief system. That's the next thing. We have to align our entire belief system to even be able to match this frequency. If we believe that money is not abundant, how will we ever be able to achieve $1 million business, right? So we have to change our beliefs to align with that goal. And then that opens up that opportunity, that world to us. And by opening up that world to us, we can now take in and start to experience some of the feelings and emotions associated with creating that. What we think it'll feel like to buy our dream car. What we think it'll feel like to buy our dream home. What we think it'll feel like to cash out $1 million check. What it will feel like to open up our bank account and look and see that we have $1 million sitting in a savings account or in investments or whatever, right? We can start to open ourselves up to what it may feel like to achieve that, how that person will feel, what their energetic state is like, and then therefore we can start to align our energy with more of that. And the last step is the actions. So with aligned thoughts and feelings, that supercharges the actions that we take and allows them to catapult us into this reality, into this experience. And so by making sure all three are aligned and keeping it that way, right? Regulating our actions every day, monitoring our thoughts, making sure our emotional state is never falling short. We can experience emotions, but we never allow our overall emotional condition or energetic condition to be of a lower frequency. And if we can maintain this over a long period of time, you will achieve the goal that you are aligning with. The same goes in reverse, however. If you are aligned with the wrong thing that you want to achieve, if your thoughts are in alignment with lack and being poor and being broke or being fat and lazy, that's going to be your experience. You will eventually, by maintaining that state of alignment, reach that outcome. Whatever you are aligned with, you will eventually see manifest. So that's why it is so important to monitor your thoughts, feelings, and actions. So the next step is aligning your identity. So this sort of goes into aligning your mind and your feelings, but your identity is the person that you view yourself as. You also want to fully align your identity. You want to believe that you are the type of person who can achieve your goal. If you are the type of person who can achieve your goal, The emotional state is a natural byproduct. The thoughts are a natural byproduct. The actions are a natural byproduct. The identity that you hold is your foundation, is your baseline. So if you hold an identity of, I'm $1 million entrepreneur, you not being $1 million entrepreneur feels misaligned, and so you will correct that. So that's kind of the whole idea, is if you can instill and solidify an identity that is, I'm a high achiever, I'm an entrepreneur, I go after goals, I like to achieve big things, I make a lot of money, right? All of these different things. If you create an identity around that, right? If your identity encapsulates those specific traits, that specific experience, then that is the experience that feels aligned with who you are. Therefore, anything blocking you from that actually feels misaligned, not just something wrong with you. And so therefore, it makes it a lot easier to dissolve those problems and start to realign your lifestyle with the goal that you have. So this is how alignment leads to effortless progress and deep flow state, is because when you are fully aligned with the goal that you want to achieve, the work is actually a natural byproduct of who you are. Therefore, it doesn't feel like strain. It doesn't feel like force. It doesn't feel like you're going against yourself to do the things that you need to do in order to get to the outcome you're trying to achieve. So when we are constantly like fighting ourselves, fighting this battle within ourselves to do the work that we have to do, it makes it very difficult to focus on the actual progression, right? It makes it very difficult to focus on actually learning and getting better and growing and evolving our craft, because we're constantly just battling ourselves to get to the work. So when we're fully aligned, that means that we're more focused on the actual progression. We're more focused on learning and developing and growing within our craft. And so therefore we progress a lot faster, right? It feels as though progress is effortless because that's where we're naturally focusing all of our attention and all of our energy. And so as we do with flow state, it just becomes this consistent momentum that we continue to build without having to put in much extra effort internally, without having to ever fight ourselves over doing the work. And that's a very big factor with this, a very important key factor within this, is that when we are fully aligned, this effortless progression becomes our natural state of work. We're constantly progressing. We're constantly able to focus all of our attention, all of our energy into learning and developing and growing in order to eventually align with and achieve our real goals, whatever it is we're trying to actually achieve. And then the other thing is deep flow state. We can enter deep flow states on command because of the fact that there is no mental noise blocking us from doing the work. There's nothing in the way of us actually just fully, completely concentrating on what we're doing and allowing ourselves to progress as much as possible within that. So that is all I have for this video. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. You guys could check out my TikTok and my Instagram with the links in the description if that's something you're interested in. I do make short form content, but I know not everybody watches shorts. However, if you do and you would like to see more content like this, those are in the description. But that is all I have for this video. If you guys learned anything valuable, please comment down below. Let me know. I'd like to see what you guys have. But without further ado, I am out of here. Peace.